Not today, basketball god of death. Not today, not now. It is not yet time for the Memphis Grizzlies of 2022 and 2023 to say goodbye. They found a way behind the efforts of their young star backcourt to live another day and another plane flight that they have to take, which reminds me, our buddy Damichael Cole has a plane to catch, so we better start this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is a Victory Thursday here on Locked On Grizzlies. We are so excited that you are joining us wherever you're at, whether it's in and around Memphis, Tennessee. Maybe you're in New Zealand as a Steven Adams fan following the Memphis Grizzlies playoff push. Maybe you're one of our wonderful Los Angeles Lakers folks who every time the Lakers win, you light up our comment section, and every time they lose, it's a little more quiet. So I don't know how that's going to work this time around. Maybe the downloads and views will be down a little bit because the Lakers don't come over unless they find a way to win. Anyway, whoever you are, however you're taking in the show, welcome once again to Locked On Grizzlies. And the dynamic duo is back at it. I enjoyed having Howard Beck on Wednesday's episode of Locked On Grizzlies, but it's always nice to have my co-host Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee with me. You'll notice he's in a suit and tie, fresh out of FedEx Forum, ready to give us the lowdown on Grizzlies Lakers. But before we get to that, we have to make sure that we are reminding you that you can get Locked On Grizzlies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available wherever you get those. You can also find us on YouTube, like, comment, rate, review, subscribe, all those fun things. Make us a key component of your NBA playoff experience as the Memphis Grizzlies stay alive. It's not off-season time yet in Memphis, Tennessee. There is a game 6 to get ready for, and we'll focus on that in our next episode of Locked On Grizzlies. But today we are going to talk to Michael about the amazing performance, first and foremost, of the backcourt of the Memphis Grizzlies. And we'll give flowers to Luke Canard, who, I'm very excited to give flowers to. We'll talk about the confidence of this team and the energy that kind of feels like it's rebuilding around these guys from unlikely sources, maybe. But we got to start, Damichael, obviously, with you there in the building at FedEx Forum. You're not there literally right now. I know our virtual backgrounds. They're very official. It looks like you're there in this moment, but you're not. You were very recently. What was it like there? Game 5, an early start, seemed like a late arriving crowd or a late energy crowd, but things definitely picked up as the game went on, and obviously the energy was definitely provided by Ja Morant and Desmond Bane.
Yeah, the energy I got was a cautious crowd. A crowd that knew this team was down.
A nervous one.
A nervous one. That's a better word for it. And it kind of reflected early on, but when you went into halftime with that lead and Dez and Ja, as you mentioned, combined for 39 points at halftime, started to wake up a little bit the second half, and it got a little bit more lively there in FedEx Forum. But Joe, we've talked about it a little bit on here. We saw game 1, Jaren had a big game, Ja and Dez struggled. We saw in, I think it was game 3, Ja Morant, 45-point game. Dez and Jaren struggled. Game 4, Dez finally woke up. But Ja shot 8 of 24. Jaren shot 5 of 15. This was the first time that the Grizzlies had 2 out of those 3 to shine. And it was a difference. It was a difference because what you're starting to see, and I don't care if the Laker people are on here, and I don't care what they have to say, about this. But if you are a Laker fan, you can be honest with yourself when I say this. Like, LeBron James isn't 100% right now. Like, LeBron James is not the same guy we saw for most of the regular season, and he's not, the guy we've seen for most of his postseason career. Some of that is a credit to the Grizzlies. And there's also, as I said, the foot injury that he came back from, where it seemed like for a while there that he probably was going to need surgery or something like that. You can tell that there's still some limitations there. Even when he had the amazing game in Game 4, it was 22 points. I know the 20 rebounds and all that was notable, but it was 22 points. 22 points for any other typical 4 or 5-time All-Star. That's cool, but it's LeBron James. Like, this is a guy we're used to scoring 30 plus in the postseason. But I'm rambling on with that. At the end of the day, having Ja and Dez shine at the same time. First time in their careers, both guys scored over 30 points in the same playoff game. Dez had only scored 30 points or more in a playoff game one time, scored 34 in the series against the Timberwolves. So he finished 1 point shy of his career high on that end. Ja adding 30-31. Having those two guys play efficiently was the biggest difference in that game for me.
Gigantic performance by both of those guys. I believe Desmond Bane is 24 years old and Ja Morant is 23. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, Damichael. I think that's accurate. Point that I'm trying to make is they're still young. They're not even in their primes yet. So lots of reasons to be excited about those two and the way that they are capable of performing. I was also excited by watching the way that players played around those guys. And we're going to talk more about confidence and kind of getting swagger back later on in the show. But I thought that it was good to see Jaren Jackson Jr., even though he wasn't at the level of Ja and Bane, play well around those guys. It seemed like the offense was more crisp. The screen setting was better. They seemed more active in and around the paint. Spacing was improved. You heard them talk a lot in media availabilities. Obviously, you've been at every one of them, so you've heard it firsthand. I've heard it secondhand through the media myself. The idea of execution. It felt like they executed the game plans better in this game. I'd have to go back and watch the film. I don't recall a ton of wide open Rui Hachimura open threes. A lot of open threes in general for the Lakers. I'm sure they had some, but we have talked about in the past how that's a massive gaping weakness in the scheme of the Grizzlies defensively, and that did not rear its ugly head in this game. There was more attention to detail on both ends of the floor, and that's a credit to Taylor Jenkins, who has gotten some heat in this series, and we'll talk about another way that he shook things up a little bit later on in the show. But I thought that they just executed better. They looked more like they understood what the game plan was, and they were able to implement it more fully than they had in previous games.
Yeah, and riffing off of that point, I'm sure we're going to talk more about it, what exactly they did there. But Ja and Jaren and Dez, all those guys had more room. There's more space out there to operate overall. We've seen, with Dylan Brooks, another off night for him shooting. And at this point, I don't even know, if it's an off night, but he's struggling right now.
It's just a night,
3 of 15 shooting, 2 of 10 on three-pointers. Talking to him after the game, his message was, he's going to keep shooting. He did admit that it's challenging. It is frustrating right now what he's going through. But in his mind, he believes that, that game is coming where he makes 3 or 4 three-pointers and he can be the difference in a win or a loss. He thinks that's still coming. So it seems like, his confidence is still there. He's just trying to be more effective in different ways. He's passing up a couple more three-pointers to get, in the paint and play make and do those type of things. But overall, Luke Canard, before he went out, we'll talk more about him later, knocked down a couple three-pointers. And Tyus Jones was able to knock down a 3 today as well. So those guys getting involved a little bit more, because you don't need them to be amazing, especially when you got Ja scoring 31 and Dez scoring 33. And we didn't even mention another key component to what those guys did. Ja and Dez each had 10 rebounds.
Absolutely.
Jaren Jackson Jr. had 10 as well. And that was important because the Grizzlies want to play small ball more. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. But the thing about it is, if you want to play small, somebody's got to get some rebounds. And those numbers reflect what I've said pretty much all season long. One of the underrated things about this Grizzlies team is Ja excellent guard rebounder. Desmond Bane, excellent guard rebounder. And you needed them to be that in this last game. And you're going to need them to be that going forward in this series.
Because as you alluded to, the going small thing worked pretty well. And we're going to talk more about that here next on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add to your ride with My Garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit, or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win with the right parts when they are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. The Memphis Grizzlies and the coaching staff made a pretty sizable adjustment, or at least tried to, and it paid dividends. We're going to talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Stay with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am one of your hosts, Joe Mullinax, joined by my co-host, Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. Grizzlies beat writer for them. If you're watching on YouTube, he is fresh out of FedEx Forum, rocking his shirt and tie. And in our starting segment of the show before our video opening, I talked about how he has a flight to catch, and that was not hyperbole. He quite literally has a flight to catch as we record this episode. So make sure you're following Damichael at Damichael C on Twitter. If you don't already do so, make sure you're following at Locked On Grizz. Lots of great content coming to you. We're going to have a Friday show, of course, previewing Game 6. All sorts of fun things. So stick with Damichael, stick with me, stick with Locked On Grizzlies as the postseason grinds along. We alluded to it multiple times, Damichael, the small ball. And there was a time in the game where I tweeted it out. You mentioned it briefly earlier. It was Ja Morant, Tyus Jones, Ja Morant, Tyus Jones, Luke Canard, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr. Like Desmond Bane at 6'5", 215 pounds.
Power forward Desmond Bane
was playing the traditional power forward. Now, mutual friend of ours, Parker Fleming of Bluff City Media, the site manager, Grizzlies editor over there, my boss technically, he talks about positionless basketball a lot. So I know he was super excited about how the Grizzlies decided to play this game. I think it was you. I want to give credit to who it was. Somebody posted that you asked for an adjustment and you got it. You asked for a tweak, and here it is. Taylor Jenkins said, okay, screw it. We're going to put the shooters out on the floor with another creator in Tyus Jones and Jaren Jackson at the 5 and see what happens. And holy crap, did the offense take off. The Lakers had no answers for it. And the thing about this, and we'll talk more about this as the show goes on, Damichael, one of the reasons that I think the Grizzlies are getting more confident, that I think fans are getting a little more confident. We talked about Desmond Bane earlier in the show. What adjustment do the Lakers make on those guys? There really isn't one for them to make, right? And if Memphis is able to take advantage of the small ball situations, which obviously the Lakers could adjust a little more to that, that could be the thing that swings this series and gets it to a Game 7 at home, which the Lakers most certainly do not want to happen. They want to end this thing Friday in Los Angeles. The small ball tweak, if they can't come up with a fix in the next 24 to 36 hours, could be the turning point in this series.
Yeah, it was huge, right? And you mentioned what's the tweak the Lakers can theoretically make, with that. And it's simple. You're probably going to have to play Anthony Davis more than 35 minutes. That's the only way, because what the Grizzlies did, Joe, was as soon as Anthony Davis went out of that game in that first quarter, it was lunchtime, because it's
LeBron at the 5 technically.
Or Rui.
Right.
Rui and LeBron kind of, play the 4 and the 5 in that situation. And, neither of them are your traditional center guys who are going to just blow you up at the rim and dominate you with their rebounding. So what the Grizzlies did, they went to this small lineup that you mentioned. And, the Grizzlies thrived. The Grizzlies thrived. The Grizzlies closed the first quarter on a big time run there, on a 10-0 run. It was 28-24 when Jaren Jackson Jr. It wasn't him. I think, subbed out of the game. It was 28-24. The Grizzlies were in the lead at that moment. And the Grizzlies went to Luke Canard, Desmond Bane, as you mentioned, Tyus Jones, Ja Morant, Jaren Jackson Jr. Closed the quarter on a 10-0 run. Super effective. Talked to Desmond Bane about it after the game. He basically said, hey, look, everyone on the floor can play make. Everyone on the floor can shoot. Everyone on the floor can push the tempo. All very important, things. Basically, you get the rebound, you push it. And that allows the Grizzlies to get out in transition faster. We've talked about how important that is to them. We talked about the spacing. Dillon Brooks, again, I don't want to keep harping on Dillon Brooks here, but he's kind of become the prime example of this. The Lakers sagged off of Dillon Brooks almost disrespectfully. Like, hey, shoot. And the closeouts were lazy. There was no urgency in their closeouts.
There were strong Tony Allen pulled hamstring against the Warrior vibes.
Gave you some flashbacks, didn't it?
Terrible ones.
Terrible flashbacks. Yeah, and Dillon shot 2 of 10 on those 3-pointers. So what the Grizzlies did, if you notice, in that situation and later in the third quarter, Dillon exited the game after some missed 3-pointers, and the Grizzlies kind of had more success when they brought in Luke Canard and had Desmond Bane and Ja Morant all on the floor together. In the second half, they did it with a little bit of a bigger lineup. It was Santi Aldama, Xavier Tillman, who were in that lineup that closed the quarter. I think it was like a 12-2 run in the third quarter. But the 10-0 run in the first quarter, Jaren Jackson Jr. in your front court, Des pointed that out like, hey, because the downside to this lineup is you don't have as much defense.
No.
But Taylor Jenkins used some words, Joe, that you'd like to hear, because I asked him, quite frankly, after the game, was he planning on benching Dillon Brooks? Because Dillon Brooks in the third quarter left the game, 8:15 left in the third. That's if you're familiar with Grizzlies rotation patterns, Dillon Brooks does not exit the game that early. And usually, it's usually Desmond Bane. Dillon stays in the game, Des exits it, and Des comes back in the game late in the quarter and plays early into the fourth. And Dillon Brooks usually comes in, midway through the fourth quarter or whatever that time is, that he plays longer in the third. But Dillon exited with 8:15 left in the third quarter, did not return for the remainder of that quarter, did not come back until Luke Canard was injured, which right now, as we know about that injury, it's a stinger. And it sounds like today they're going to do some evaluation stuff. So I'm sure we'll have more on what happens there today. You got our Twitter handles down there. So just stay tuned on that. But the lineup was very effective to the point, Joe. I wonder, what does it mean for Dillon Brooks? That's what I'm thinking.
I think what it could mean for Dillon Brooks is they use him like a big. They use him as a 4 or even a 5 potentially in that LeBron James center, Rui Hachimura center lineup. More than likely a 4, next to Jaren.
Yeah.
But I think that if you have him next to Morant and Bane and Canard, I think Canard will play. If it is truly just a stinger, that's something you recover from. Now, the difference between Canard and Anthony Davis, who suffered a stinger and came right back in the game. Obviously, the Grizzlies were up by a decent amount. They were playing the odds a little bit. But at the same time, Canard is a shooter, right? Being a perimeter-based player, that's a little different than being a blunt force object like Anthony Davis is often. But just the presence of Canard makes such a massive difference in terms of spacing. And we've talked about this before, Damichael. Without Steven Adams, something that is underrated with him, you don't usually think spacing with Steven Adams, but he creates that space with his body in terms of the screens he sets, whether it's on ball in the pick and roll or if it's an off-ball screen. Gosh, I wish I could see Luke Canard come off an off-ball screen from Steven Adams. We're not going to, maybe next year. But for me, you can't sag off of Canard. You can't. And you see the Lakers, they don't do it when Canard's on the floor. And that helps Desmond Bane. That helps Ja Morant. They have to make a decision. If they leave Luke Canard wide open, he's quite literally shooting 54% as a member of the Memphis Grizzlies from 3. There are some people, not going to name names, that don't shoot 54% on layups or at the rim. This guy is from range hitting at that rate. They have to defend him. He is a massive weapon, and he has to play. He has to play. I understand defensive concerns, but that guy has to be on the floor, especially in those small ball lineups where an Anthony Davis's presence isn't going to be there, because it enables you to take full advantage, because AD is a better rim protector than I gave him credit for.
He's a bad boy.
It's like he listened to Locked On Grizzlies and he said, I'm going to prove, to quote a Lakers fan, the fat bald guy on the left, I'm going to prove that guy wrong. All right. But when he's not on the floor, that doesn't exist. The Lakers don't have that. And Canard makes such a difference. Hopefully he's healthy. I think he will be. But, we'll keep an eye on it. Damichael mentions, make sure you're following him on Twitter at Damichael C. He'll be at the Grizzlies practice, shoot around, meeting, whatever they're doing on Thursday. Damichael will be there in Los Angeles, and hopefully we'll be able to talk to Damichael for Friday's episode about what all that looks like. So Canard's massive. That adjustment was a smart one from Coach Jenkins, and hopefully that can continue, because Damichael, I know you noticed it. I noticed it from afar. The confidence, it seems like the team is getting their vibes back a little bit, finding their groove again. But it's different, right? It's not quite as audacious as it was before, but there's still some audacity coming out of the mouths of Grizzlies players, which you and I are accustomed to at this point. But it's guys that don't normally do that kind of talking. And I think it's a good thing. And we'll talk about why. I'm not going to put words into Damichael's mouth. I think it's a good thing, and I'll explain why, and Damichael will tell me I'm crazy or not when we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Ibotta. Watching your closet grow after purchasing all of this season's latest trends? How about also watching your cash grow back with each purchase, doing so through Ibotta? The average Ibotta user earns $120 a year in real cash back. That could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip. Or you could use your cash back to buy that flight you've been eyeing, that game you've been dying to go to, or the fancy dinner that you have been craving. Ibotta gives you real cash back, not points, and other apps that give you points don't really amount to much. But with Ibotta, you can get real cash back that you can cash out into your banking account, PayPal, or gift cards. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying Ibotta by using the code LOCKED when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app. Use the code LOCKED. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store, and use the code LOCKED. We have you locked in on Grizzlies confidence mounting heading into Game 6. Next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Stay with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, one of your hosts, Grizzlies contributor, Grizzlies columnist over at Bluff City Media. Go to bluffcitymedia.co/join. Use the promo code Mullinax. Get 10-day free trial plus 10% off an annual subscription to our insider content, including my piece for today talking about faith in the Memphis Grizzlies. You can check that out and much more over at bluffcitymedia.co. Of course, you can check out the commercial appeal where my co-host and good buddy Damichael Cole is the Grizzlies beat writer. He does so much work over there. Mark Giannato is the Grizzlies columnist over there. Lots of fun things to read between Bluff City Media and Commercial Appeal. Between those two and Locked On Grizzlies, Damichael and I have you covered. So make sure you're checking out both of those sources of information. And I wrote about for today, Damichael, the idea of the team seeming to find their footing in terms of confidence. And I mentioned earlier, it's not Ja Morant sitting there and saying we're fine in the West. It's not even Dylan Brooks poking bears and calling people old anymore. It's Desmond Bane saying before Game 5, when they lost Game 4, we'll be back in Los Angeles for Game 6, and kind of calling a shot. And now both Desmond Bane and Xavier Tillman have been like, oh, well, we'll be back in front of our fans for Game 7. First off, Lakers fans are going to say, oh, thanks for the bulletin board material. What are they supposed to say? Oh, the Lakers are probably going to beat us. You and I, and again, I won't put words in your mouth, and that we'll save that for Friday's episode. Lakers in 6 makes a heck of a lot of sense. Like, if somebody wants to make that argument, I'm not going to say that they're wrong. I'm the co-host of Locked On Grizzlies. I'm going to hope that they're wrong. But, Howard Beck on the show on Wednesday talked about that's the most likely scenario at this point is Lakers in 6. And I think that's a fair, logical thought to have. the Grizzlies are going to want to win. So they're going to speak to that. But you hear it from guys like X, like Bane, who you don't typically connect the dots and intertwine the webs of confidence through, at least verbally doing so. So you heard them say it. They're live in person. Do you see this team finding their swagger again? Is it a rediscovery, a reimagining? Because again, the way that they rose up, the way that Ja Morant was, that's probably never coming back, right? Because a lot of what that was, there's a lot of living on the edge, so to speak.
Yeah.
I'm curious as to your perspective of, are they remembering that they're a good basketball team? Are they remembering that they have a superstar like Ja Morant? They have an all-star caliber player like Desmond Bane, the defensive player of the year. Are they finding their groove? Is it like I said, a reimagining of the confidence? What is the vibe that you get from this team heading into a big game 6 tomorrow? They should be confident. They're the younger team. LeBron James is tired. Like, that was my takeaway from Wednesday night's game. And I'm 2 years younger than LeBron James, and he's in the phenomenal physical specimen.
So are you calling LeBron old?
No, I am not calling LeBron old. Charles Barkley made a great point on the post-game show. Like, you can play really well at that age, and LeBron is doing it better, arguably, than anyone's ever done it. But Father Time still exists. Like, it takes longer to recover, and the Lakers don't have that time. It's a quick turnaround. Again, the Grizzlies just naturally are younger. There's reason for optimism here, right? Is that what we're seeing unfold?
I've said pretty much the entire time, the longer this series goes, because, there were a couple built-in days between game 1, game 2, game 3. The longer this series goes, the more it's possible that it'll tilt in the Grizzlies' favor because there's less time in between games. And another reason to believe that can be a factor into game 6 is because now you factor in a travel day. You're going to travel, and then you play a game. So even less turnaround, from that perspective of flying out to LA for 3.5, 4 hours. Now, getting back to the confidence. Here's the thing. Desmond Bane, he says that all the time. Earlier this season, they lost to Golden State. The locker room was all over the place in that January loss. And Desmond Bane was like, we'll be fine. It's just who he is as a person. Very even-keeled, mild-mannered guy who is going to find the best in all of the situations. Now, as for the Xavier Tillman Sr., that one surprised me a little bit more. And, I wouldn't even call it trash talk. I know people want to equate the things these Grizzlies players say to trash talk.
How dare they believe they're going to win, right?
In his case, he was pumping up the crowd.
Right.
And I think he was asked by a team reporter, what did he think about the crowd today? He said, the crowd was good, blah, blah, blah. And, we'll see you for sure for game 7. And, they go crazy. And that was the situation there. So what I got from it is with Desmond Bane, it's pretty much who he is. Xavier Tillman Sr., his confidence is growing. Dylan hasn't lost his. Ja seems confident. Jaren, it feels like this team has found something. And it feels like, in a way, after that big win, they smell a little blood, Joe.
They definitely see opportunity. I think that's a very fair way to put it. And we can close out our episode on this. Ja said something along the lines, and I'm paraphrasing here. I don't have the exact quote in front of me. He said something about playing up to the pedestal that y'all put me on, or something like that, or that people put me on. And you might know it. Again, you were in the room, so you might have it a little better.
That was a direct shot. It was
a shot across the bow of the media, a similar playbook that Dylan Brooks wearing the hot dog suit. We're all trying to find the guy that did this, Dylan making himself the villain, but we can talk more about that another time. That stood out to me because athletes, I played college football, much smaller scale, obviously. You played sports, Damichael. They are on the very peak and top of their profession, right? they are constantly looking for motivation. And I think that this feels like, whether it's wanting to get to a game 7 and come back home and be on that stage, because lots of these series are ending early, right? Like they might be the only game 7 this coming weekend, potentially. They got to win game 6 first. It seems like they're just all trying to find their way of motivating themselves to reach that higher plane. And that's the vibe that I get from it. And again, it's not, poking bears and calling people old and those sorts of things. It is just a steady belief that the way that they do things in Memphis, Tennessee is a way that you can win basketball games. And that confidence can be contagious. Santi Aldama played terribly for much of the series. And then in the second half, you mentioned it earlier, he played his best basketball, right? He came out and showed a little more of what he's capable of than he had shown previously in the series. I think that these young players, for a young team, even if it's a bit manufactured, they're not going to come out and say, yay, the probability is the Lakers are going to win. They're going to come out and say, we're going to do this. And when you have performances like they did in game 5, led by, in a sport like basketball, you need stars, led by guys like Ja Morant and Desmond Bane. Obviously, the Lakers have LeBron James and Anthony Davis, but for all the reasons that we've outlined, why not the Grizzlies be in a position to have it close going into the fourth quarter, and then you roll the ball out and play and see what happens?
Yeah, that's something I completely agree with. And I tell you, we'll talk more about this game, this upcoming game, and as it gets closer. But I'm just, thinking of the storylines here, and I'll talk to Taylor Jenkins, later on today in LA, and we'll see what he has to say. But there's the Dylan Brooks angle, there's the Luke Canard and his recovery, and there's just who else? You still need other guys to step up. Sure. Of course, Ja and Dez are very capable of repeating what they did, because they both averaged more than 20 points per game in the regular season. But at the end of the day, that was the first time that both of them scored 30+ in the same game in the postseason. Definitely repeatable, but you don't really want to depend on that, because guess what? LeBron James shot 5 of 17. That probably, I don't care if he's 60. That's probably not going to happen again. That LeBron is wired a little bit differently. And again, we always talk about it. Role players going back to their home floors, the Austin Reeves of the world, Rui Hachimura, Malik Beasley. They threw Wenyen Gabriel in the rotation a little bit in game 5. Those guys getting back on their home floors, you never know. So it's a lot that has to take place here for the Grizzlies to get this win in game 6. But I'll tell you this, the encouragement around the team, the confidence, it's all there. It's all there. They believe they can do it.
They believe they can do it. And if they have that faith, then again, it permeates, it spreads. And the idea of believing in Memphis one more time, game 6, it's going to be a fun atmosphere there in Los Angeles. I'm excited to watch it. Damichael will be there live and in person covering for the Commercial Appeal. It's going to be a crazy setup, and we'll talk more about that on our Friday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Thank you so much for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen each and every day. Thank you to our everydayers, all of you that check out Locked On Grizzlies every time it comes out. You got notifications on YouTube. You open your podcasts every morning. You get to work. You're on your way to work. You're at school, studying, whatever. We're the first thing that you turn on. We appreciate that immensely, far more than we can ever say. And we hope that you'll continue to do so as the postseason grinds along for the Grizzlies. Our Friday episode, we are going to have Damichael there in Los Angeles. Hopefully we have some Luke Canard updates, some good news. Hopefully we have some solidifying of storylines, as Damichael talked about. And of course, partner, the preview of the game itself. Because again, you and I are here partially because we're Grizzlies folks, but also partially because our views on the game are valued. We try to be unbiased. The Lakers are going to be favored. And as I mentioned earlier in the show, I understand why. Like, we'll have to talk through how Memphis can overcome that on our Friday episode.
Yeah. 4 consecutive losses. 2 in the regular season, 2 in the playoffs. So either that trend continues and the season ends, or you do something you haven't done this season and you head back to Memphis for Game 7.
All that and more on our Friday episode of Locked On Grizzlies. So for my partner, Damichael Cole, I am Joe Mullinax. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. Continue to do so as we end our week tomorrow. Stay locked in. This is Locked On Grizzlies.